through ADM Summit. We want to tap into all kinds of minds, and every summit is incomplete without the contribution of the young and talented minds. I know we've made you wait, guys, but our last session of the summit will be a panel discussion by students where the young minds will be talking about planning the new architecture and design world. And here comes the exciting part. Each student will be showcasing a 5-minute presentation on how they imagine the new world's design. So it's going to be really exciting to watch and know their take on how architecture and design has the ability to transform the world. Now, if you have any questions for these young minds, feel free to send them in. Let me take you through our student panelists quickly. Ryan Wong is a third-year architecture student for the Bachelor of Design at Melbourne School of Design, MSD. He was also an architectural intern at James Law Cybertecture International Holdings Limited. He believes that this future of architecture is to build structures that are resilient and sustainable. Now, next up, we have Manya Sharma. Manya Sharma is a fourth-year architecture student from Manipal University, Jaipur, India, with an inclination towards leadership, teamwork, and management. She is currently the General Secretary of MUJ Student Council. She has won the Best Delegate in 2016 from the Indian International Model United Nations. In the field of architecture, she's interested in learning about sustainable practices, and so are we. Next up, we have Jacob DiCrescenz, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, who is a high school sophomore in Evanston, Illinois, and has a deep interest in architecture and hopes to one day train in this field. So lovely. He's particularly interested in the relationship between human emotion and the built environment. His articles have appeared in Architectural Record, Common Edge, and Arc Daily. He still plays with Legos though. Lorenzo Uribe is the fifth-year architecture student at IE University. Lorenzo has gained experience working as an intern in the architectural offices in both Bogota and Barcelona. Currently, he's the editor-in-chief of Prologue magazine, an annual student-run publication focusing on issues related to the field of design, architecture, and culture. His interest lies in building beautiful things. The session will be moderated by one of the most eclectic and fun designer, Mr. Vivek Gupta, principal architect, Arvind, Vivek and Associates, New Delhi. He's a designer practitioner in the field of architecture, urban design, and interiors for the past 36 years. His studio is best characterized by its methodology to explore and test responses to produce designs that fulfill the spirit of the brief in an inventive and unique way. Currently, the studio is engaged in diverse projects such as master planning for eminent corporate bodies in New Delhi, housing and educational institutes, corporate interiors, institutional buildings, and much, much more. Now I'm going to request Mr. Vivek to take the discussion forward from here. Over to you.
Thanks, Parth. How exciting this is, honestly. When Natalie left us with a saying that what are we passing on to the next generation? And I'm so happy that the next generation is right here. And I'm delighted to be talking to a bunch of extremely intelligent set of people. I think you've already introduced all of them. The most exciting part is that towards the end of this summit, we are talking to people who hold the future in their hands. Who better than them to tell us about what is their idea of the new world order? Because we come with our own prejudices, we come with our own mindset, we come with our own issues, and the solution that we provide to all those issues are within the brackets, within our own thinking, which could be always clogged with some kind of prejudices or something like that. When you have people like them who have blue sky thinking, who are blooming with ideas, who are completely unfettered in their design vocabulary, in their design tools, who better than them to tell us what do they think of the new world order? How would they want to design the new world order? And I've always been extremely enthused to talk to these young people because they open your minds. They give you such amazing ideas which can infuse new energy into people with clogged mind, with not exactly a blue sky thinking. I'm so happy that, and I don't want to kind of prejudice have their minds with any kind of narrative that I would want to tell them. So my first question to open to everybody is, do you think architecture or design can change the world? Who will want to take that first? And my next question is going to be, and how?
Yeah, I'd like the lady to go first, Vivek. Let Manya come forward. She's the leader of a university, Manipal. Let her better go first. The only lady on the panel.
Anil is being very, very biased towards, and I was trying to have a gender equality, but go ahead, Manya.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So yeah, I'm Manya. And yeah, I mean, architecture has always sort of impacted the world. So as a large part of what we see around us and the things that are created by architects, from building facades to hotel lobbies, to the landscape of a park. So all of these are more or less created by architects. So starting off with how architects have evolved, architecture has evolved and how it is evolving. So computers have like largely impacted the practice of building design, for example, invention of computer aided designs, and has enabled architects to actually experiment with new organic and free forms. So taking an example of Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, which is a very famous curvy building. So, and now as we see that, computers are changing buildings once again, but with algorithms this time. So earlier computers were used in the final stage of design. And now as we see with algorithms, computers will be involved in the initial stage of the designing. So algorithms can actually help, in sort of refining and creating the new designs, and with different shapes, and they can work out to provide the best ways to actually lay out the rooms, construct the buildings, and change them over time to meet the user's need. So with the involvement of algorithms, everyone will be involved in a building's genesis, from clients to contractors and everyone. So yes, I mean, architecture and design is actually changing the world and our future.
Manya, are you saying that? So are you saying that architecture through technology will change the world?
Yeah,
Lorenzo,
definitely.
if I can ask you, how do you think architecture as architecture, without just the use of technology, can change? Architecture as design, a new way of thinking, can change without the technology part of it. Because I would like to bring in technology as another tool, but just purely as architecture. What I mean is that as problem solvers, architects as problem solvers, or architects as solution providers, do you think there is a scope for us to do and change the world order?
I mean, you create a physical environment in which people live. I mean, it's the most evident manifestation of a change. I mean, it's there, it's unmovable. And the question of whether or not architecture can change the world is a radical yes, it can. The question, however, I believe should be more sophisticated, which is, can it change it for good? Because, for example, part of the critique towards modernity and the modern movement was precisely that you had this huge paradigm shift in which mass housing, mass building, optimization of materials, and a very homogenized city fabric took over more traditional values, more traditional cities, ornament, and one way of building, which had represented a world. And we're still suffering, well, suffering is a very strong word, but we're still living through that. And the debate on whether or not all of the changes were for good is still in the air. And so the question for me should be, can architecture change the world for good? And I hope it can. But I mean, it's still open.
Suddenly I feel that we've had this opportunity to rethink architecture. Architecture is also about building. If last 2 years to the rest of the world have given an idea of, do we actually need to build? Because there has been a paradigm shift in the way we work, this hybrid way of working, or work from home and everything. So this suddenly means, don't you feel that there could be tomorrow a rethinking on the need to build those many downtown centers, those many offices that we are building, those many commercial buildings that we are doing? Online retail is such a big thing. Do we actually need to build all those malls? Do we need to build hypermarkets when everything is going to be online. This is one of the things that I thought that the newer generation of you guys could look at, that how can we reduce the actual, that could also be a sustainable way of building, that you don't build so much. Materiality is one thing, but architecture and building industry remains the largest plunderer of natural resources. So if we stop building as much as we are building, do you think that can be one of the approaches? As I said, we become a solution provider, not a problem solver. So problem solver is somebody who looks at things in hindsight, and a solution provider is somebody who's looking ahead. And Jacob, you are someone who's really behind in age and ahead in thinking. Do you think that you could have a new world order by a new way of thinking? What do you say?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think especially going forward, kind of following the pandemic, I think a lot about society is going to change, both in terms of how people interact with each other and, how people just lead their daily lives. So I definitely think that, like you said, in addition to reconsidering how we construct buildings, just building less or building more economically or more to suit the specific needs of, the place and environment in which we're building those buildings is definitely going to be a big part of going forward and designing for the new world order. So yes, definitely.
Rand, you want to expand on that?
Yes, I kind of agree with everything all the panelists. And I think it's not just about, building economically, it's building buildings for that serve a purpose, such as because the future and the aim of future cities is pretty much solving current world issues. So I think building architecture that serve a purpose is more important than building just like generally.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that brings me to the idea of what do you think, apart from, as I said, design thinking and thinking design is one aspect of how you build. But the other thing is that, of course, that everybody's talking about non-conventional ways of building. Natalie spoke about, we no longer build the way we used to, not you, but we used to build. We need to rethink how to build going ahead. We already have 3D printed buildings, prototypal buildings. Do you think to reduce carbon footprint, to reduce on-site work, to reduce labor costs, we could start prefabricating buildings off-site and then just placing them? All that will happen perhaps as of now as a challenge is that we will take out the romance of all the architects, because everybody wants to build very uniquely and everything, and prototypal buildings don't really give you that opportunity. But I think as a short-term measure right now to fulfill housing for all, as we say, instead of building commercial building, glitzy buildings, first and foremost thing as a society we need to do is to have at least basic housing for everybody. Do you think that that is one of the responsibilities? Because Jacob talks about building with emotion. I think one of the first and foremost thing would be to be able to, when you talk about inclusive architecture, when you talk about inclusiveness in architecture, I think inclusiveness is not about providing facilities for all abilities in a building, but also to be providing for everybody. What are you saying, Manya? Starting with you.
Yeah, so yes, I mean, I think it is quite important that, talking about, like you said, prefabricated structures and, sort of building them on the site, taking them to the site. So that sort of brings in the technology as well now. So, which is quite important. I mean, in the future, if we talk about urbanization, where, you will probably require mass housing in the future, and you will require to, sort of construct in a faster process, in a faster manner. So that is when, bringing in things like prefabricated designs and all together. So it is
using
quite
technology,
important
yes.
to bring in using technology, definitely. Yes.
Who's the most tech savvy of all of you? Please raise your hand and give me a very cracking answer on that. Ran, you want to go for that? Are you very tech savvy or no? Or is it Jacob who's playing with Lego and all the computers all the time?
I mean, and then again, this will be a more personal opinion, but the thing about technology is that if it becomes isolated and it becomes a value in itself, in that if something is built with BIM, made efficient, and has a way of optimizing processes that makes it
very
just true. That, I mean, that's appealing to a point, but you also need to reflect and think, what are you applying that technology to? And then it means that you need to take it into account with a bigger quantity of factors, aim it at a purpose, and speak about architecture, building, beauty, and other kinds of factors. But this glorification of technology for the sake of being new, for the sake of being efficient, and for the sake of being glitzy, I'm not so convinced in that.
Absolutely, I agree with you. If we were to use technology only to build a very complicated facade or use a parametric facade, I think, I personally feel, and again, please don't go by my prejudices, and that's why you guys are here. I think it's a waste of technology. Yeah, I think we need to, and through the channels of this, the 4 panelists who are here representing the generation next, is that what good use that we can put technology to, which is giving us a heads up on the way we will be not just simply building with the prefabricated structure, but also what are the other ways, which make a building sustainable. I think Natalie spoke about energy. I think energy is the biggest need, and I feel if we can harness energy through non-conventional resources, that will be the best way forward. And we all are aware of global warming and all the issues of environmental impact. Any thoughts on that, guys?
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely think that going forward, especially given, not only the pandemic, but also global warming, we'll need to design in ways that aren't only necessarily sustainable physically, in terms of climate change, but maybe also societally sustainable, if that makes any sense, as in designing buildings that can consistently, generate new forms of societal interaction and generate new relationships between people in ways that kind of go beyond what I think we've, previously seen buildings to be designed to do, if that makes any sense.
So bringing in interaction through, maybe instead of compartmentalizing senior living or something, have integrated living, having large public spaces, which Natalie also spoke about, that you should have large public spaces. Going forward post-COVID, we all know what is the most important thing, to have well-designed public spaces so that when you get out of your homes, you feel safe, you're in a convivial atmosphere. And that is possible if we build intelligently and also we build frugally. I think also one of the things I feel that all of you need to look forward to is to how to build frugally. I think there in this simple quest lies a lot of solution, right from sustainability issues to resources, to climate change, to contextuality, to climatically responsive architecture. If we build frugally, like you, Lorenzo, spoke about building with mud, building with local material and everything. I said when you build frugally, you do all of this, and I think therein lies a trick. And going forward, if we imbibe that in our DNA as architects and designers, and when Anil spoke about a two-way interaction, when is it the client who speaks to you about sustainability or you are proactive about sustainability? Going forward in your own practices, if clients who come to you, instead of giving them a space program, which is very large, very grandiose, if you start giving them a space plan, which is sufficient, which is just frugal in nature, and you convince them to build that, I think therein is what the future leaders could be doing that. Any thoughts on that? Who will go for that?
Yeah, I mean, I can. So yes, I definitely agree that, we might need to see a new way of looking at how buildings are designed, because similar to what Natalie was saying earlier, I think it's really important that buildings be designed for and representative of their intended users. So I think that essentially looking at architecture as solely a relationship between designer and client, and as, this is what we can do, this is what our building could be designed to represent or say, is really interesting. But I think it's also important to, like you said, design buildings that are just good enough, and also kind of source the opinion of the intended users of that building to see what they think, and to let them take an active role in design, because after all, they'll be the ones who are actually using the space. In other words, I think that we should be asking people how they might be practically using buildings and what they want from those buildings, rather than almost foisting architecture on them.
Very true, very true. It's the adjunct spaces, which are extremely important in today's context. Adjunct spaces to a neighborhood, adjunct spaces to a building, adjunct spaces on the fringes of a city. I think that is what is extremely, extremely important. And I think that is where I'm not looking at the client and architect relationship. I'm looking at the responsibility of an architect to sermonize, to kind of through design thinking, to process of imbibing public space thinking into people. Because we make just buildings, we also give a thought process for an entire city. So if you guys will start thinking like that, it'll be the new world order. I think that's what I was going to ask you. That is that a theme that you subscribe to, or you will want to continue to build through technology alone, and then maybe build your dream building and earn some name, where the role of an architect, as architects are supposed to be, architecture is supposed to be social art, or it's not. So would you want to continue it as a social art, or you want it for personal or client's glory?
I don't know if to an extent, as architects, we give ourselves, I'm not an architect yet, but the architect as a figure gives itself too much importance. That is, in a sense, you have already construction companies that can give clients very efficient, very cheap, and very easy solutions. And you have a series of industrial opportunities that can sideline the architect as a figure in its entirety. And so what's the role, the autonomy of the architect, the point where it where it can exercise some kind of influence in society, and that's still up for debate. I like to think that the thing that architects can give that a construction company can, for example, is a sense of artistry, a sense of craft, and a sense of beauty. Like that's what you train for, that others don't. But that's a romantic posture as well, and you have and that has its limitations. And also when it comes to the new world order, well, I don't know if that's a way of trying to impose a utopia upon someone else. And maybe the rest of the world doesn't want a new world order. And who are you to tell them? Well, who are we to tell them that they should embrace this new paradigm? So I'm a bit skeptical about all those positions.
So the new world order, what we are referring to is new world order because you live in that, you are inhabiting that new world. So do you want to build around you a world that is suitable to you? It's from that perspective. It's not from taking a moral high ground and saying architects can change the world from that perspective. I'm saying when you build for yourselves, the next generation, and you come with the challenges that you've faced or your parents have faced or your citizens of your city have faced and everything else. So as when you become an architect, do you want to change that? Because you are building for yourself. You're not building for yesteryears. You're building for the generations to come. Would you want to change that? That was the question, and that's why I said that you have this blue sky thinking as of now. So, but I agree with you. Yes, sometimes we take this moral high ground and feel that we can change the world, but we are just limited architects and we have only that much that we can do. But anybody who disagrees with Lorenzo?
I mean, I don't exactly disagree with Lorenzo. I just think I might arrive at a slightly different conclusion. While I definitely, do agree that, architecture isn't exactly necessary, you could say, from a purely engineering or physical perspective, I also think that architecture really has a unique importance in designing the new world because, in my opinion, what takes a building from being, essentially a glorified box that is nothing more than functional to being, like a work of art is really its ability to give people an emotional experience, like a positive emotional experience of their surroundings. And since architecture is so universal and so permanent, I mean, literally in a way, architects can design the world in the sense that they design the built environment. I definitely think that architecture is extremely important in that, you know, because experience is everything really in our lives, we need to design the built environment to generate positive experience, you know, to essentially maintain our positive experiences.
But do you want to make a new world, or do you want to preserve, protect, and pass on the things that you love about this one to the people that are coming? Because there's a, I mean, and this is a personal bias that I admit, but there's a feeling of dependency and a feeling of love towards the things that already exist, in that before trying to make something new, I'm interested in preventing them from dying, so to speak, and from being forgotten. And that's, I mean, it's an odd position, but it's one which I feel needs to be talked about whenever you're trying to envision a world to come, which is, what are we going to take from the past and from the present, which is very dear to us, and that we wish to pass on to the others. I mean, if you spoke about beautiful buildings, and how many generations have walked through Venice, gone there, and they want their children hopefully to be able to do it too. And so that the debate is quite there too.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack. Go ahead, Jack.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, I mean, I also definitely think that the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and that we can both, you know, preserve the past and what we like about the past and what we value, you know, what creates positive emotional experiences for us that already exists, and also design new buildings that do the same. And also, I mean, going back to the technology in the future, I definitely think that, you know, we can use technology to preserve you know, those aspects of the past that carry such meaning for us and that are so emotionally powerful. Again, you know, speaking about Venice, like you said, you know, we can use technology to preserve, you know, all those old buildings that are, you know, slowly sinking, and preserve that profound experience, you know, for our children and for our grandchildren.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, so
I think there could be must-have. Yeah, Manya.
Yeah, I would just like to add to it. So yeah, thanks, Jacob. So that is something that I was actually pointing towards, that technology, not meaning that, you know, we are completely dependent on it. What I meant was that it can act as a catalyst to the whole process, and still we can, you know, follow all our past ways and all the techniques that we have been following for so many years now. So just to use it as a tool to, you know, make things quicker and faster. So that's the whole point that I was putting forward, as technology being a part of architecture now.
You know, Lorenzo is a very is very different thinking from this point of view of being inclusive in terms of what we have inherited and how do you leave that behind. It's not, I think, it was not about obliterating the past, and you know, you carry the past with you in the future also, but there could be a categorization of must-haves and nice to have, and we don't need, you know, that could be the three categories. So the good experiences, the emotional experiences that Jacob always speaks about, and that touches a chord with me, because, you know, architecture is an experience, it's not a facade. And you know, when you speak about technology as architecture, and you purely speak about architecture technology being used for facades and parametrics and complex structures, I fear that it shouldn't end up becoming a tool, and that the tool can go completely wayward. Like you spoke, Lorenzo, and Rand spoke about cost in architecture, you know, because those buildings are built at humongous cost. Because when you fall in love with your architecture, you start, and there's a very beautiful form, then you want to give it all that you have. So that means not building sustainably from economics point of view, though you might make a beautiful structure. So I think we need to, and the generation here needs to contextualize that, needs to take into account what are the must-haves that we need to carry forward. the new world order, Lorenzo, will come irrespective whether you and I want it or no, because it's coming every day. Every day there is a new invention, there is a new need, there is a new way of working. So that process, if architects halt and resist that, then we will be left behind. As it is, I think architecture as a profession is slightly marginalized profession because of the role that we play. I do not know if somebody is going to be ticking me on the time or something like that, but is it time for you guys to make a presentation? Because I'm sure that when you make your presentations, you are going to be doing that about something that you want to show all of us, and then maybe we can talk about the works that you have done and why you want to do that. And also, but yeah, I think I still want to get that debate going amongst you guys. Do you agree with each other, or there is some radical thinking that I'm looking at that one radical thinking, somebody radical, not from a perspective of a blasé thinking or something, but from the point of view of a rational thinking, but a new way of thinking of architecture going ahead. Jan, you've been silent for too long.
Okay, so a new rational thinking, I kind of agree with pretty much everything you guys all said. But I kind of still think like what Jacob and Lorenzo and Manya said, architecture is about personal experiences. But right now, I personally think, because since the world is currently changing, architecture still needs to change. So like, for me, I'm not too much of a fan of preserving old architecture. So I'm more of a person who kind of advocates the idea where, or like believes in the idea where kind of new architecture would strive more than old architecture. Like, even though I respect old architecture and the stories behind it, but I still, and I just feel that old architecture may not respond in a way where our lives has changed. So like back in the day, our living experiences and our living methods would differ into the way we're living now. So I just feel like having architecture that reflects on this change or being updated would suit us better. Yeah,
I agree with you. Yeah, that's a rational thinking. Anybody on that?
I mean, definitely, yeah. I think I agree with a lot of what Ryan was saying, but I think I'd also make the point that, certain old buildings, still have emotional value and meaning for us. Like Lorenzo was saying, even though Venice was built centuries ago, it still carries value and it's still important to us. It still carries meaning and it still generates an emotional experience. So, I definitely think that, like I was saying earlier, it is still important to, preserve those most important aspects of older architecture, because, it's not necessarily that all old architecture is inherently outdated or bad. Certain buildings still carry meaning and are still worthy of being preserved.
That's what I'm calling timeless architecture. So timeless architecture by very definition means which fits in every time, in every generation. So that's the kind of building that we need to build. And then when we talk about building for the future, and the new world order is also speaking about the same. It's timeless architecture, where it is inclusive, even in terms of the time span, that people don't feel outdated in those buildings. You're not scared of using, if that's a technology, if it's a touch surface, it's whatever it is. So it's inclusive in that sense for all age groups. People will not change their habits of using a particular building in a particular manner. So inclusivity, even in the new world order, is very important. So that's how I think, from the experiences of the past that we're creating, Lorenzo, you're not wanting to carry all the buildings from Rome or Venice going forward. There are enough buildings that need to die. I think I always say that buildings also need to die. You can't, every building that is contemporary today is going to become heritage tomorrow. So I think going forward, we also can leave behind lot of appendage that we've got and build a little more rationally. we can go on and on and on, I think, but I think it's also time for you guys to start making your presentation. Anil has set the precedent. So shall we start with Manya, you?
Yeah, definitely. I'll just share my screen.
Sure. Looking forward.
Is my screen visible? Is it visible? I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so my topic, in fact, today is technology and how it is revolutionizing architectural design. So to begin with, as you can see, that there are these 4 images, and there's something common amongst them, if you can notice, that all of these actually depict the extensive use of science and technology, and which basically tells us that, you know, how architecture has actually been used as a tool in order to demonstrate technology for since the history, in fact. So further moving on, I'll just be talking about how technology has actually evolved in architecture. So like in the 19th century, industrialization led to the large-scale iron ore mining and processing. So which actually allowed the construction of metal structures. For example, the greatest example is Eiffel Tower, as we know. Then later in the 20th century, as technology came into play, contractors actually started to use an assembly line process to erect the new skyscrapers. For example, the Empire State Building. Then further moving on, talking about the current and the future scenario of the 21st century construction technology. So the world is actually sailing in a computerized ocean, and everyone is adapting to the newer technologies. So for example, as we talked about BIM or generative architecture, 3D printing, dynamic facades. So they are all coming into play, as we can see. And I'll be further elaborating about these. But the main point that I've put this up is that, as we can see, since all these centuries, we can notice that, you know, how actually architecture has been used to depict the technology of a country or the world, and how we have advanced in technology and how architecture has been depicting it for so many years now. So firstly, I just want to talk about a few things that we have, you know, started to use as technology in currently in the world. So firstly, talking about 3D printing. So in architecture, we have seen that, you know, parametric design tools sort of assist the amazing structures. And then the use of large scale 3D printers actually help to push the materiality of those structures. So 3D printed construction will actually greatly expand the limits of construction technologies. So for example, if, you know, 3D printed modules are being used and being assembled at the site, so, you know, that kind of makes the process easier and more faster. So yes, and then moving on to virtual and augmented reality. So AR and VR have actually been you know, have actually offered the architects an exciting and dynamic way to collaborate with each other and actually present the ideas to the clients. So the use of AR and VR technology in architecture is actually expected to grow. Since there have been, you know, 3D renders, walkthroughs being used for the clients to actually visualize whatever they want, whatever the design or the structures they want. But however, now the use of VR is actually helping them to feel the space, and hence the use of it will soon be increased and eventually it will come into use a lot. So yeah, Then further moving on to talking about robotics. So the use of robots is combined with digital design tools, which means a new aesthetic is possible. And with the novel shapes and patterns that would be nearly impossible to achieve without automation. So architects can actually use robotics to build habitable structures in areas that, would normally be unsuitable for human life, like oceans and deserts. So robots will actually, be able to build structures in those places. Then talking about generative design. So it basically combines parametric design and artificial intelligence together with the restrictions and data included by the designers in them. So you can see in the floor plan that has been provided in front, it evolves from genetic coding and using the methods like contracting graphs and growing corridors. So yeah. Then moving on to dynamic facades. So a dynamic facade, as we know, can also be called as a responsive facade, is a building exterior that can, change the response to its surrounding environment to maximize its performance. So this can actually help control the interior environment within the building and minimize the energy consumption of the building service systems. So as you can see in the image, once again, the facade is actually responding to the solar radiation according to the particular time, and hence providing thermal comfort to the occupants within the building, and at the same time, reducing the energy consumption. So yeah. Then moving on to parametric architecture. So as we know that, there are various softwares like Rhino, Grasshopper, Maya, and etc. That actually cater to the specifications that are required by the clients. For example, as we know, keeping in mind the climate, the requests of the clients, or the budget, the materials, and everything. So these softwares actually help to make the process easier and sort of help in the process of designing. So yes. So further, just to sort of end as a conclusion, that what's next? What do we expect in the future? And what are our thoughts about technology in the future? So the advantages of technology are actually attracting people and industries to actually adapt them, though the consequences of their rise on people's lives and industries and jobs remain unknown. But in the case of architecture, technology will increase efficiency in design and construction of buildings, as well as create multiple solutions that will push the boundaries of architectural developments. And it is an opportunity to actually discover what ways the world could be improved through technology. So yes, thank you.
It is really insightful and very, very good, Manya, because there's hope, and there is the new learning that we can have through technology. It's an eye opener, certainly, that if we start having buildings built through technology, at least we will be able to save certain energies. We'll build little more organically or non-organically. We'll build systematically, and we'll be able to build much in time. Who will go next? Are you ready, Jacob, with your presentation?
Yeah, sure. All right. Just give me a sec to share my screen.
Sure, sure. Waiting.
All right, so I'd like to start by expressing my genuine gratitude to the organizers of this panel for inviting me. I'm just a high school student, so I really am humbled to be included today and very grateful for the opportunity to learn from all of you. So I'd just like to spend the next few moments sharing with you a few thoughts on the role emotion can play, and in my opinion, should play in the future in architecture. All right. So, So actually, some of my earliest memories are of driving up and down Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, where I'm still growing up, looking out the car window at the buildings that line the lakefront. And from a very early age, I noticed something. Different buildings made me feel different emotions. Certain buildings might surprise, inspire, or move me, while others would bore or even annoy me. So it seemed intuitive to me that architecture was about what I would later learn psychologists call the vitality effects, those elusive qualities of emotions that live in the human body and that can be described in kinetic terms like surging or ebbing. Architecture was a full body experience, I realized, because it was an emotional experience and emotions are felt in the body. And actually, emotion guides and regulates cognition in a way, and the two actually do this reciprocally. It's a essentially reciprocal recursive feedback loop or relationship. So what this means for architecture is that it's impossible to talk about architecture from a purely intellectual standpoint because emotion and cognition are inextricably intertwined and you cannot separate the two. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am," but the modern science of human emotion has revealed this to be only partly correct. We do not only think, but we feel, and this feeling, it would seem, is the key to being. So eventually I became so interested in this topic that I wrote an article about the emotional impact of architecture. And after it was published, I was surprised to discover that there's a lot of controversy in architecture regarding this idea that emotion is central to our experience of the built environment. So there's no doubt that architecture has a critical role to play in responding to many of the largest problems we're facing. For example, climate change, health pandemics, energy efficiency, and social isolation. But in my opinion, it would be a tremendous loss if architecture continued to remain wary of human emotional experience. Architecture is about the individual's experience of their environment. Architects create a uniquely permanent, uniquely functional form of art, as we were talking about earlier, intended to make people's lives better. So I'm suggesting that people's emotional experience of architecture, the feelings elicited in them by the built environment, is a subject worthy of serious study. Now, a lot of people who are far more knowledgeable about architecture than I am, including the other panelists in this session, have suggested that this isn't really feasible, that it's not possible to study individual differences in emotional experience. But my respectful response to that assertion is, but that's precisely what the science of emotion already does. The language we need to discuss these ideas with rigor and precision already exists. The language of emotion, also known as affective neuroscience, has already identified the ideas and constructs that could clarify how architecture impacts us emotionally, and therefore how architecture can make our lives feel better and not simply work better. And I actually have a sense that what's often considered architectural genius or innate talent might actually be a greater capacity to imagine the emotional experience of a person as they move through the built environment. And interestingly, affective neuroscience has the words to describe this capability as well. The term mentalizing refers to our ability to understand the mental and emotional states of other people. And significantly, unlike genius, mentalizing can be taught. So architectural education is, as you could probably guess, it's a topic that's particularly important to me because I'm still only a high school student and I haven't yet had the opportunity to train in the field. And so I'm very interested in what architectural education might look like in a few years' time. This slide doesn't just discuss my ideas about how architectural education could be improved, it actually contains my hopes for my future in architecture. First, I'm hopeful that architecture will open up to the sciences. Architecture could benefit immeasurably from scientific insights about how people interact with and respond to their environments. The opportunity to learn from and collaborate with professionals from other fields is something that architecture, in my opinion, doesn't currently take full advantage of. Second, I'm hopeful that architecture will be thoughtful about how we can use technology. Again, as we were talking about earlier, technology, I think, works best when it's used to solve problems that exist, you could say, outside of us. So for example, implementing more sustainable design practices or creating buildings that effectively respond to human behavioral patterns. But in my opinion, technology isn't as effective at solving problems that exist inside of us. So for example, problems of emotion or experience. I think that we can use technology to further human aims in architecture. So for example, making buildings greener or more energy efficient, but that we still have to be thoughtful about those aims. Third, I'm hopeful that architecture can be more intentional about increasing diversity in the field. Bringing new ideas and experiences to architecture, in my opinion, would really help propel it forward and lead to a new wave of architectural exploration and innovation that I think, in my opinion, is really important. And then finally, I'm hopeful that architecture can develop a more precise language with which to formulate constructs and discuss ideas. As a field, architecture encompasses technical, theoretical, and artistic knowledge, and I'm hoping that we can soon add emotional or neuroscientific knowledge to that list. As a newcomer to the field who's been listening quietly to architectural discussion, I've heard the confusion that can result from ambiguous terminology. I believe that architecture should have vigorous debates at all levels of analysis, and one day I hope to join you in the discussion. So once again, thank you all so much for offering me your time and expertise today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
That was quite insightful, Jacob. You spoke fast. You spoke passionately, but I'm sure that everybody's caught on to that. His fervent plea to include emotion in architecture, and I couldn't agree more. I think architecture, I always maintain this experience. It's not a picture. It's not a pretty picture. It's an emotion that we live in all the time, and we emote with every building. And that's why some, like in India, you say some buildings have that positive impact, and some buildings do not inspire you so much, despite the fact that they could be beautiful, sometimes. So you talk about the Vastu part of it or whatever. But yeah, always a fervent plea to the generation to make architecture an experience and not an Insta picture. And I'm hoping that that remains the soul of, to put soul in buildings is more important than to put a facade on a building, I think, because you can have a square plan or a square building and have a rectilinear or a elliptical skin to it. So I don't think that is really architecture. Are you ready with yours, Ram?
Yes, I'll share
Great.
screen. So can you guys see my screen?
We can see that. Go ahead.
Okay. So my perception on how I imagine our future world or the future of architecture would be architecture that heavily focuses on the idea of resilience or building resilient architecture. So the idea of resilient architecture pretty much means designing structures that learns and adapts to its surroundings, and structures that could also live and breathe themselves. So like structures that produce their own electricity or water. So a good example to explain resilience would be like having a house that produces its own energy, food, and water without having the need to rely on the city grid or local merchandises. So for my quick presentation, I'll share some of my own projects I've done in school and competition proposals I've submitted to explain my idea of resilient architecture. So this is one of my school projects I've done. Its goal is to densify a specific part of Melbourne to accommodate the increasing number of people who want to live in urban areas, and to create an adaptable residence which can be used independently, but at the same time allow for flexibility over time, where it is also able to accommodate different cohabitation scenarios. So for example, during the first decade, this plot of land is arranged in a way that the bottom dwelling can accommodate a family of 3, with the grandparents living in the dwelling above. And then during the second decade, the COVID pandemic hits Melbourne, for example, and then the sad passing of the grandparents. The dwelling then evolves and arranges to accommodate a live-work living arrangement with parents and kids permanently working from home. And then the dwelling above, originally the grandparents' home, can be turned into some kind of architecture studio or a larger home office for the parents. And then lastly, to wrap up this usable or multiple flexibility space, for the third decade, the team becomes older and wants to move out and live independently. So the plot can accommodate dual occupancy. So I believe that the future of architecture should be resilient in this way, where where buildings and houses can actually change and be flexible. Another project I want to share with you would be my competition proposal for the Eco Highlands. This is an off-grid modular building that floats on the Victoria Harbour in Hong Kong, and its goal is to solve current world problems present today, such as rising sea levels and reduction of arable land caused by climate change. So inspired by projects by FKIT and BIG, I've created my own adaptation of what a green eco village of the future could be. I believe that the eco island should be inclusive, include every single part and everyone, to have a diverse home ownership. It should, like I said, it should be self-sustainable. It should produce its own food and water. And everything in the eco island should be produced and reused. So this is a little diagram that illustrates how the future of architecture should actually reuse and recycle its sources and substances, and yeah, make it more renewable. And then the other one would be introducing like prefabrication and installing goods created from the factory and just shipped to create this incredible piece. And I believe that in the future, cities should grow their food and actually have advanced farming and EV charging and a market for people to actually sell. Here's some images of my eco island, especially including drones and electric vehicles to actually carry people around, so that people don't actually have to own a car. Like I said, buildings should be reused, should produce energy. So for example, introducing a biogas facility, wave tidal generator. So all these technology could actually help and benefit our future. Another way to make buildings more resilient and more sustainable is to actually introduce passive design. So just the orientation of the building could actually determine how the building is sustainable. For example, having these roofs that actually extend out, which act as shades, would actually lower the energy usage of the entire site. And lastly, my final project would be this a Mars proposal built on Mars. So like I said about resilience, people need to actually survive and strive not only on Earth, but on Mars. So having a resilient architecture that actually builds itself inside a crater would help people live and actually commute here on Mars. So some of the process, so people would actually first land on Mars, and then like what Manya said about technology, actually use 3D printing and actually AR to actually build these craters, and then actually strive and live on this planet. And then eventually I have this concept where for phase 2, Mars would terraform and would suit humans' atmosphere so people can actually breathe on Mars. This is one of the phase 2 renderings. So inspired by this famous diagram from OMA, the programmatic time diagram, it kind of illustrates where the future of people, like the future living styles of people, would actually change, where the environments actually change what they do. So in terms of, for example, having people would take the Hyperloop to different places, people would actually make their own food, grow their own food, control the waste, etc. So I believe the future city, especially in Mars, would introduce like commercial areas like what we have on Earth, but self-sustainable, have farms, like advanced farming for people to actually grow food and eat, as well as a dwelling created using 3D printing. So like what Manya said, I was actually kind of interested about where she said using parametric design in construction and design. So I've actually, for this project, I've used parametric modeling to create this crater. So I believe like what Manya said, the future of architecture is, especially in construction, could be done using a script. So for using scripts, so all you have to do is just plug in the different parameters, and the computer would actually automatically create your own building on a specific site. Or you can create different crazy forms that suit the person's the new lifestyle, for example. Yeah, so this is what I think the future of architecture could be, using resilient architecture. Thank you.
That's really delving into future and very, very well done. I think, yeah. So that's when you've amalgamated well into your design thinking using technology. When you speak about the eco-village or eco-hub, that's the hyperloops and the way you were transporting people, you're talking about farming for sustainably living and everything. And basically a self-contained module that has all the resilience and building. And when you spoke about integrated living, which is very, very correct, we are building for resilience, and that integrated living is the need of the hour, that how you can have adaptive reuse of any building that you have. No building, no property should go waste. It shouldn't get converted into a silo, or a silo should get converted into an office building, or an office building can get converted into a mall, or a mall can get converted into a co-working spaces. So that adaptive reuse allows to preserve buildings and give them an alternative use. I think that is also sustainable architecture, because when you do adaptive reuse, you don't make any building redundant, in fact, and the same building can be preserved, can be revitalized through even the adaptive reuse. I think it's a good blend of both technology, design thinking, and thinking about future and the future way of working. Great, Lorenzo, are you set?
Yep.
All right, waiting.
So I'm going to present a project that I did for a competition with some friends, and the idea was to find a ruin, a skeleton of some kind, and then present a vision for it. How could it be intervened? How could it be reused? And what model for a new society could emerge out of that ruin? So we and my group, we found this deserted town called Marbella in Catalonia, here in Spain, and we decided to do some kind of intervention on it. Before I delve into it, I would like to share this quote by Bob Van Rij. He was a Belgian architect, and well, you can read the quote, but the two parts that stick out for me is this idea that there's a life within architecture, something that you try to pull out, and that it belongs to that building. There's a certain autobiography, and I connected it to the town that we intervened, and to the idea of the ruin, because there's this. There has always been this romantic fascination with ruins, and this is John Soane's famous picture of ruins, of the Bank of England being eaten away by time. But the ruin has this life that speaks about itself, about the past, about what it lived through, and that it's very evocative. And so when we went to this town, this place in Manya, we visited to it. It's full of graffitis. It's a place that has its own local legends, and we gave a stroll through the town, trying to find opportunities and ways, which sparked questions, because I think actually that's the most fruitful place for a student to place himself. I'm not that interested in trying to give out answers. I don't have them, but trying to ask the right questions. And so the project itself, it was rather a way of asking questions and trying to think about what ruins and what the future is. And so when we project ourselves into the future, how do we imagine past and future meeting. I mean, are the contrasts very intense? Do we try to keep the same volumes? What are the colors? Should we try to fit into the landscape? And so this was a series of insertions and small vaults that we built into the landscape. We tried to envision it in red concrete to try and give these earthy tones, but then also create very light insertions out of prefabricated building techniques within the volumes of the existing buildings in the town. But also, the program itself had a series of vaults for the storage of goods, big warehouses, so that these towns, which are there's many towns like this in Spain. It's actually one big demographic problem that is very spoken about. But in a sense, if they could become logistical hubs or places for infrastructural requirements, that could give them a second life. But that also becomes expressed in a shape. In this case, we tried to make subterranean vaults that were interpretative and open enough and had a very wide and but also strong shape that gave character to it. But it opened the question of okay, if you're going to intervene in this heritage site, like how do you interpret it? What programming is appropriate? How do you continue in forms? Do you introduce breaks? How does this come into being? And so we also played with levels. And so our new proposal also had to coincide with the layout of the town itself. And we had different heights, and this was interesting to think about. But then also when we went back to the vaults, there was a certain form, a very strong image. And that image somehow, I mean, we debated ourselves because is it appropriate to make such a strong gesture when you're trying to intervene into an existing place? Or is it perfectly fine? I mean, we didn't know that, but this idea of trying to make prefabricated vaults that integrated new and basically typical modern day reinforced concrete materialities into an existing town, but within a more traditional shape, that would be interesting, and it gave it a strong shape. But then also at the same time, when we dealt with the volumes of the houses that sticked out in the landscape, like how light should the intervention be? Should the layers touch each other? Should there be gaps between the new and the existing? Should the openings in our envelopes and in our buildings match the windows and the openings in the existing buildings? Like what should be the appropriate contrast in the materials that are used? And maybe this light, frugal intervention within existing structures could be a way to approach existing heritage. But then also when we then scaled up and tried to think of other programs such as residences that could be inserted inside, the idea of taking the volumetric parameters, the proportions of the existing buildings, and then twisting them a bit by trying to keep rooms that spoke about the proportions of the existing rooms. Even if the first room was the church, that ample hallway, that large ceiling could somehow still be translated into the new plan of the building that we were creating. And so that also gave opportunities to make radical contrasts, juxtaposition that went on the opposite direction, towards the opposite direction of the existing building, but that somehow still tried to or were able to create a harmony within the atmospheres of the existing structures. And then on the parts of it that were complete, I mean, on the parts of the project that were completely new, they should also speak and have a certain atmospheric that gave vision to this idea of home that we were trying to create within this existing town. And then, thank you. I mean, this is just to mention my other two teammates, DiCrescenz and Javier Fernandez, because it was a joint project, but which for us was always more about asking questions and presenting ideas rather than coming to a fixed conclusion. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorenzo. That's very interesting. You know, you're layering the future on the past. You are reinterpreting the past with your intervention so beautifully, very well integrated. And I think, yes, that is one of the parts, because always radical thinking or thinking on a clean slate is not the answer. Also, And I think that's been very interesting part of the entire discussion. Whereas what Manya said, that going forward, it's going to be largely driven by technology, where we'll be using AR, VR, 3D printing, and parametric architecture, and maybe biometric architecture and stuff like that. Jacob had a very, very interesting take on creating for emotions, building with emoting architecture. Jan had the interesting take on how we will build eco hubs. We'll at the same time, he wants to do integrated living, another perspective. And then Lorenzo has just finished telling us how we can coexist with new vision, which is your last slide, really looking ahead and leaving things behind, but at the same time letting them integrate. And that's a young mind talking like that. And I'm very happy that you're saying what you're saying, because all of us want a clean slate, you know, because we would like to create, we don't want to carry any baggage. But I think that's very mature thinking when you say, no, I would like to carry, and you've been right through saying that you would like to carry the goods of yesterday into the bright future that you want to create. And I think that is very, very interesting. You know, I also realize that all of you, you know, are from different parts of this world. And there is, when we say that architecture is contextual, whereas art is global, you can place art anywhere, but architecture needs to remain contextual, because, and since you are from different areas of this world, what is it one thing about your country, your design, your architecture that you feel the rest of the world can inspire from? Is there something that you would like to talk about? And that can be the benchmark when we go into the future. I think Manya spoke about timeless buildings or timeless structures, like right from Eiffel Tower to something which is technology 100 years or 150 years back, but it's relevant even today and maybe last another 500 years and God willing, much, much longer. So stuff like that. Is there something, who would like to go first on that? Manya?
Sure. So yeah, like I said that, you know, we have always been sort of depicting technology since the history. So, I mean, talking about my country in particular, there are so many, what can I say, historic structures or techniques that have been, you know, for example, sustainable techniques, depending on different weathers, that are so important, and actually they need to be taken forward, and they are actually, you know, still being applied and are quite necessary. So yeah, I mean, there are, like, you know, climate oriented techniques like jalis and screens that are so important. And, you know, we can still bring in technology and sort of have an amalgamation of those techniques. So yeah, that's something that I
think you did that in your presentation. You spoke about the brisole, or the facade, which is a dynamic facade, which is using technology in response to the sun, and, you know, goes on providing adequate shade, looks at the tangent of the sun, trajectory of the sun, and then behaves in a particular manner. Yeah, so I think if we say that jali is very Indian, or the brisole is part of that jali, and then that is what your country has given to the rest of the world, I think that's extensively used in the rest of the world as well. That is the contextual. I think jali is contextual to a climate, certain kind of climate, and it has been adapted everywhere else when we build like that. Yeah, great. So what about you, Van? Is there anything in particular that you feel building a kind of architecture that the rest of the world can take inspiration from?
Yeah. So since I live in Hong Kong, and especially in Hong Kong, we get Hong Kong is a really small place. So all our buildings and all our cities, like we're one big city, and our city and my city is extremely densified. So I think there's one really good inspiration where other cities could take reference from would be how Hong Kong could actually build tall and build in a more dense environment, in a more dense way, because since right now the world population is booming, and more people are willing to are more likely to want to live in a more urban area instead of a rural area. So maybe having cities where instead of building horizontally, building vertically. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's a good point, because I think to build in those tight areas and to build vertically and with efficiency, to be able to provide for last mile connectivity, to have parking spaces is amazing in Hong Kong. And I think, yes, there is, Hong Kong is a prototype for all dense cities. And we all know that by 2050, 70% of the world population will be living in urban areas. And we all know that the shadow of urbanization are slums or marginalized service providers who come because of urban population that is in there. For every household, at least in the rest of the world, you have 4 to 5 to maybe 10 service providers of different kind who are basically there because it's an ecosystem that gets generated out of the urbanity that is coming into urban living that is there. Yeah, so good. Lorenzo, what has Spain given to the rest of the world in terms of inspiration? Or you want to point out something else that some other building that you feel inspires the rest of the world?
I mean, I'm from Colombia, so I mean, if it's about my country, there's a firm called Arquitectura Expandida, and they make very low-tech, very participatory designs in the slums of Colombia. So they made a cinema, for example, in a very marginalized neighborhood called Ciudad Bolívar, and it was all done with bamboo beams and columns and a polycarbonate facade, very cheap, very industrial materials. But somehow that cinema became a reference point for the community, and they developed political strategies in which everyone could participate. And so architecture became a tool for neighborhood building, community building, and things of the sort. And I mean, and if it comes about Spain, which I've been living for the last 5 years, Barcelona for me, and especially the way in which they build over there with architects such as, well, José Antonio Coderch. He died already, but the way in which they were able to integrate tradition and modernity is incredible for me. But yeah, that's my small intervention.
I agree with you more. Barcelona is a prime example of beautiful architecture of Gaudi and everybody, and then post the Olympics, the new architecture that has come up. I can see Parth there, and he's always come whenever he has to intervene and kind of eject everybody out of this screen. So before Parth, you're muted. I can't hear you. Parth, you're muted. Parth, you were muted. Couldn't hear you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt anyone. It was so interesting to watch. And I think we are actually running short of time, but I would like for you to complete your last comments, because
so I'm just waiting to hear Jacob, and I think he's the last one to speak on. Yeah, Jacob, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually might have 2 answers to this, and you guys can pick which one you like better. But I think that, especially maybe, over the first half, or it depends, over the course of the 20th century, I think a lot of American architecture has been about kind of pushing the limits of design. And obviously this happens in all countries all over the world in all time periods. But, I definitely think that kind of having that drive to innovate and explore and try out new things is really important. But on the other hand, I also think that we need to make sure that we temper that drive to explore so that we don't end up creating things that might sound interesting hypothetically, but when built, practically turn out to be either unusable or not generating a positive experience for people in the built environment. And then my second answer might be that, I really think that the union of old and new in the, in certain examples of American architecture is really interesting and might be a model for what we need to do in the future in terms of preserving aspects of the old, as we were talking about earlier, and also integrating new technology and new ideas into architecture. So, I mean, for example, the development of the skyscraper, you could say, and well, obviously, the skyscraper isn't an exclusively American invention. People have been building tall things for, millennia. But I think that union of new technology and old ideas, which, so for example, Art Deco is a really interesting example of how we can combine old and new to generate new buildings and new ideas.
I agree with you, but we leave the tempering part to the Middle East. I think that's where architecture is going completely haywire, and we need a little bit of sobering there. The Americas are still doing fine, I think, staying within limits, and good architecture still being created. Not that I have anything against, but I'm saying tempering part is where, as you said, a lot of unusable, a lot of ambitious architecture is happening there. There's a race kind of devoid of the solid grounds, accepting that creating monumental architecture. And in fact, creating monumental architecture has been from times immemorial, been leaving a footprint, leaving a imprint on every city is what architecture has been. It's been wonderful, guys. You were all bang on. This is the power of youth. When you bring in each one as such diverse, and I'm including you, Parth, now that you're on the screen. That makes 5 of you. Apurva is incognito as of now, but she can come on. And I just want to tell you, it's been a brilliant session. It's an eye opener for me. It's a joy. It's really a pleasure to interact with the future architects, the future leaders, or future thinkers. And the only takeaway for me is that much as I think that the future generation is going to be radical in their thinking, I think they're far more rational than we are. We are very abrasive. We are very egoistic. I would say, in our generation, perhaps not Apurva, but in our generation, we've been thinking architects are gods. We create things that outlast us. But I'm so happy to see all of you have such rational thinking. And right in the beginning, I used the word blue sky thinking. And I don't think you guys are having a blue sky thinking, which is very good. You have a canvas and you want to paint within that canvas. And I think then the future is in great and secure hands. We are not going to go haywire. It's a tempered architecture that you guys will create, unlike what we've seen in the rest of the world, or what some of your previous generations have created a mess for you all to clean up. But I'm very happy that you are all ready with your brooms and your tools and technologies to clear up all the mess that has been created. And you will make the world a very, very safe and sustainable place to live in. Thank you, guys. Thank you once again. Thank you, everybody, Apurva, Parth, Anil, Animation Express for having us.
Thank you, Vivek, for moderating it so well, Vivek, sir. You moderated it so well, and I felt like a sponge taking it all in, soaking it all in. Although I'm not wearing square pants, I'm not a SpongeBob, but I felt like I want to absorb every little detail that is coming out of here. I mean, some of the points about technology driving the change were interesting, but I must say, as Lorenzo was talking about, I think Jacob was talking about the tall structures. It just reminded me that India has some of the really tall structures that were built in the prehistoric times. And I saw one episode on History Channel saying that maybe aliens did it because they couldn't figure out how it was constructed. But I mean, these are the things that I know of, but I would love to delve into a little more detail about the ideas that they were expounding upon. But we're running short on time, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much to all the young minds and Vivek, sir, for this session. It was a perfect session to end this summit on. Thanks a bunch, students, and much thanks to the viewers who are watching.